Another way to download and install and run Axon Server is to use Docker. And in this video lesson, you will learn how to do it. The Docker container configuration in this video lesson will be very simple, but if you need a more advanced version, like for example, if you want to use Docker Compose, then in the following lecture, I will include a link to a blog post that is published on Axon website, and it has an example with Docker Compose. Alright, so to run Axon Server on your computer in a Docker container, you'll need to install Docker first. If you do not have Docker installed yet, then please do that first. And once you have Docker installed, then you can open terminal window and you can run the command which we are going to prepare now. And because the Docker command that I'm going to prepare now is going to be quite long, I will actually use a text editor and I will prepare that Docker command there first. And to run Docker containers, we use docker run command. So the command starts with docker space run and then space again. And when we use docker run command to run Axon Server in a Docker container, if Axon Server image is not on our computer yet, then Docker will pull it from the Docker hub and it will be downloaded to your computer. And then we can give our Docker container a name. And to do that, I will use -- name space and then the name for my container, for example, Axon Server. And this will be very helpful when you have multiple different Docker containers so that you know which one is Axon Server. Alright, so next we will need to make Docker container publish a couple of port numbers. And this is because Axon Server runs in a Docker container, and by default, Docker does not make port numbers available to outside of Docker container. So we need to make Docker to make these port numbers also available outside of the Docker container and to publish these port numbers to our local computer as well. And to do that, I will use the following flag. It is a short version of publish -p, which stands for publish, and then port numbers 8024, and second port number is 8124. So here we are requesting Docker to publish two port numbers. First port number is 80 and 24, and this is for HTTP communication, and port number 8124 for gRPC communication. So the port on the left side of the column here is a port number on a host machine or your computer, and the port number on the right side of the column here is a port number in a Docker container. So we are requesting Docker to map the TCP port 8024 in a Docker container to port number 8024 on our local machine. And we do the same for port number 8124. Now, by default, all files created inside a container are stored on a writable container layer. And this means that the data doesn't persist when the container no longer exists. So when you delete Docker container, then the data will also be deleted together with the container. And we do not want that to happen with our Axon Server. We want the data that Axon Server stores in the event store be available on the host machine as well. So what we need to do is we need to make our Docker container use an external volume for storage. And the external storage volume will be a directory on our computer. So to make our Axon Server Docker container store information in a folder on our computer, we will need to link the folder in a Docker container with a folder on our computer. And to do that, we will use the -v flag, which stands for volume. So right after the port numbers, I will use -v, and then I will need to specify a path to a folder on my local computer. And to keep things separate, I will use a different path for data that my Docker container uses. So I will create a new folder for Docker data, and I will go to terminal window. And here I'm inside of a folder of my video course. If I list files here, I should have my Axon Server that I have downloaded as a zip archive. So here I'll create a data folder that Axon Server that runs in a Docker container generates and uses. So I'll create a directory and I will call it Docker data. And then I will enter that directory And inside of this directory, Docker container will store Axon data. Okay, so I will grab the path to this directory, I'll copy the path, and I will paste it into my Docker command. It's quite long and it has spaces, so I will use double quotes and I will paste this command inside of the double quote, like this. And because there are going to be a couple of different types of data stored, I'll add one more /data here. And if this data folder does not exist, then it will be created. Then after the double quotes, I will add colon and then a path to a folder in a Docker container, which is /data. So the /data here on the right side is one of the directories where Axon Server stores its data. And another directory where Axon Server stores its data is called event data. And we'll need to create a mapping for this directory as well. So I will copy the -v and then the path to a data and I will paste it next. I will then rename data from data to event data and I will add colon /event data. And the event data is another directory where Axon Server stores its data in a Docker container. Right, and finally, if we want to configure Axon Server using configuration properties file, I will also create a mapping for a config folder. So once again, I will simply copy the -v and the path to a local folder on my computer, paste it next, and I will rename the folder here from event data to config. And the config is a name of a folder where I'm going to put Axon Server.properties configuration file. Okay, then I will put colon and then /config, which is a folder inside of a Docker container. All right, and finally, we will need to provide an image name, which Docker will use to pull Axon Server from Docker Hub. And the image name is Axonic /Axon Server. Like this. And if you do not provide Axon Server version, then Docker will pull the latest image from Docker Hub. Alright, so I think we're now ready to run this Docker command, and if I do not have Axon Server image on my local computer, then Docker will pull it from Docker Hub repository, and once the image is downloaded, it will use it to create Axon Server Docker container and run Axon Server in this Docker container on my local machine. So I will copy this command, I will go back to a terminal window and I will paste it here. And I will hit enter. Alright, so I now have Axon Server running in a Docker container and we are good to continue.